The morning sun cast long shadows across the Galactic Memorial Gardens on New Geneva Station, where beings from across the known galaxy came to honor their fallen. The pristine white marble pathways wound between memorial sections dedicated to different species, each designed according to their unique cultural traditions. The Zalakian crystal spires hummed with stored memories, while the Morphin living trees grew in perfect spirals toward the artificial sky. But it was the human section that drew the most attention, and not always the kind humans wanted. Captain Sarah Chen of the Terran Honor Guard stood motionless beside the tomb of the unknown soldier, her ceremonial rifle held at the precise angle that military tradition demanded. Her white gloves gripped the weapon with steady hands, her posture perfect despite having maintained this position for the past 2 hours. The changing of the guard would not occur for another hour, but Sarah's commitment was absolute. She had volunteered for this duty after the previous guard, Sergeant Martinez, had been injured in a transport accident. The funeral they were preparing for was no ordinary service. Admiral Harrison Pike, hero of the Vegan campaign and architect of the Human Centauri Defense Pact, would be laid to rest here tomorrow. His body would join the unknown soldiers who represented every human who had died defending freedom across the galaxy. The sound of approaching footsteps broke the sacred silence. Sarah's eyes remained fixed forward, but her enhanced hearing picked up the distinctive click of Zalakian claw feet against marble. Ambassador Thexvar, the Zalakian representative to the Galactic Council, approached with his usual entourage of advisors and security personnel. "Guard," Thexvar called out, his translator converting his clicking speech into standard Galactic. "You will stand aside. The Galactic Council has voted to temporarily suspend this primitive display during tomorrow's proceedings." Sarah did not move. Her training had prepared her for many scenarios, but direct political interference had not been among them. According to her orders, she was to maintain her post until properly relieved by another member of the Honor Guard. No exceptions. "I said stand aside," Thexvar repeated, his chitinous exoskeleton taking on a darker hue that indicated rising anger. "The Council finds your weapon-bearing ritual inappropriate for a memorial service that will host delegates from peaceful species. We will not allow armed humans to intimidate other mourners." The Zalakian ambassador gestured to his security team, and several armed guards stepped forward, their energy weapons powered up with high-pitched whines, casting purple glows across the memorial garden. Sarah felt her heart rate increase, but her training held firm. She would not abandon her post. "The human refuses to comply," reported one of Thexvar's advisors, a pale Venturi, whose large black eyes reflected the energy weapon lights. "Shall we remove her by force?" Other visitors to the memorial had begun to gather, drawn by the commotion. Sarah noticed several human civilians among them, their faces showing concern and confusion. A group of Morphin diplomats whispered among themselves, their tree-like forms swaying with agitation. Even some Centauri officials had stopped their own memorial activities to observe. "This is your final warning, human," Thexvar announced loudly enough for all the gathered beings to hear. "The Galactic Council's authority supersedes your military customs. You will vacate this position immediately or face arrest for obstruction of interstellar peace protocols." Sarah's mind raced through her options. Her duty was clear, but the political implications of this confrontation could affect human standing in the Galactic Council for years to come. However, her oath was not just to follow orders, but to honor the memory of those who had died defending human values. Those values included the belief that some duties transcended political convenience. The Zalakian security team spread out in a semicircle around the tomb, their weapons trained on Sarah's position. The tension in the air was thick enough to cut, and several civilian visitors had begun backing away from what appeared to be an inevitable armed confrontation. "Very well," Thexvar said, raising one clawed hand. "You have made your choice. Guards, remove this obstacle." As the Zalakian security team began to advance, Sarah closed her eyes for just a moment and thought of Admiral Pike. The old man had once told her that a soldier's greatest victory was not in winning battles, but in proving that some principles were worth any sacrifice. She opened her eyes and tightened her grip on her rifle, still maintaining the ceremonial position. The whine of charging energy weapons filled the air as the Zalakians prepared to fire their stun weapons. Sarah knew that in moments she would be unconscious and dragged away, bringing shame to the Honor Guard and potentially creating a diplomatic incident that could harm Earth's standing in the galactic community. But She also knew that some things mattered more than politics. Just as the lead, Zalakian guard raised his weapon to fire. A new sound echoed across the memorial garden. Heavy human footsteps, moving with military precision, approached from the main pathway. The distinctive jingle of metals and ceremonial chains accompanied each step, and the gathered crowd began to part instinctively. Sarah's peripheral vision caught a glimpse of dark blue fabric and the distinctive silver stars that marked the highest levels of human military command. Relief flooded through her as she realized that her situation was about to change dramatically. The footsteps stopped directly behind Ambassador Thexvar, and a voice that had commanded fleets and negotiated treaties spoke with quiet authority that somehow carried farther than any shout. "Ambassador, I believe you are operating under a misunderstanding of both military protocol and interstellar law." General Marcus Webb, decorated veteran of 3 galactic conflicts and current head of human military affairs for the Sol Sector, stood with the quiet confidence that came from 40 years of command. His dress uniform bore the 4 silver stars that marked him as one of only 12 humans to achieve such rank, and his chest displayed ribbons representing battles fought from the Proxima Nebula to the Rim worlds. Ambassador Thexvar turned slowly, his compound eyes focusing on the general's insignia. The Zalakian's exoskeleton shifted to a neutral gray color, indicating uncertainty about this new development. "General Webb," Thexvar acknowledged with a slight bow that was more diplomatic necessity than respect. "I was not aware that human military leadership had arrived for tomorrow's ceremony." Webb stepped forward, his polished boots clicking against the marble with measured precision. He surveyed the scene with the practiced eye of a commander assessing a battlefield. His gaze took in the armed Zalakian guards, their weapons still trained on Captain Chen, the growing crowd of concerned observers, and finally settled on the unwavering form of the honor guard. "Captain Chen," Webb said, his voice carrying the weight of absolute authority. "Report." Sarah's voice remained steady despite the stress of the situation. "Sir, I am maintaining honor guard duty at the Tomb of the Unknown Soldier as ordered. Ambassador Thexvar has requested that I abandon my post due to alleged Galactic Council directives regarding tomorrow's memorial service." Webb nodded once, then turned his attention back to the Zalakian ambassador. "Ambassador, I'm curious about this alleged council directive. When was this vote taken? And which representatives participated?" Thexvar's claws clicked nervously against his ceremonial staff. "The vote was taken in emergency session this morning, General. The majority of peaceful species representatives agreed that armed displays are inappropriate for such solemn occasions." "I see," Webb replied, pulling a small communication device from his uniform pocket. "And I assume you have official documentation of this vote, along with the specific text of the resolution?" The silence that followed was telling. Several of the Morphin diplomats in the crowd began whispering among themselves in their complex harmonic language, while the Centauri officials exchanged meaningful glances. "The documentation is being processed through standard channels," Thexvar said, his translator carrying a slight hesitation that suggested uncertainty, "but the intent is clear. Weapons have no place in a peaceful memorial." Webb studied the ambassador for a long moment before responding. "Ambassador, I've been in contact with the Galactic Council offices since dawn, coordinating security for tomorrow's ceremony. No such vote has been recorded, and no emergency session was called this morning." The general's words hit the gathered crowd like a shockwave. Murmurs spread through the observers as beings from different species began to realize they were witnessing either a massive bureaucratic error or something far more deliberate. "Furthermore," Webb continued, his voice growing harder, "even if such a vote had been taken, it would have no authority over sovereign human military traditions within designated human memorial spaces. This tomb and the honor guard that protects it are covered under the Treaty of New Geneva, specifically Section 12 regarding cultural preservation rights." Thexvar's exoskeleton darkened again, this time to the deep purple that indicated embarrassment or anger among his species. "General, your legalistic arguments aside, the presence of weapons creates an atmosphere of hostility that many species find disturbing. Surely human wisdom can adapt to the sensibilities of more evolved civilizations." It was the wrong thing to say, and Webb's expression made that immediately clear. The general's eyes narrowed slightly, and when he spoke again, his voice carried the ice-cold authority that had once made enemy admirals surrender without firing a shot. "More evolved, Ambassador? Webb stepped closer to Thexvar, forcing the taller alien to look down at him. Let me tell you about evolution. 300 years ago, when the Vegan Empire was expanding through this sector, enslaving or exterminating every species they encountered, it wasn't the evolved civilizations that stopped them. It was humans with weapons, humans willing to die for principles that apparently make other species uncomfortable. The crowd had grown larger, and Webb was aware that his words were being heard by representatives from dozens of worlds. This was no longer just about a guard post. It was about humanity's place in the galactic community. When the Syndicate pirates raided the Centauri colonies, capturing thousands of civilians for their slave markets, did your peaceful species send rescue missions? No, humans did. Humans with weapons. Humans who were willing to fight and die to free beings who had never done anything for Earth. Webb gestured toward Captain Chen, who remained at perfect attention despite the chaos surrounding her. This guard stands here not to intimidate anyone, but to honor the memory of humans who died protecting the very species that now find our traditions primitive. Admiral Pike, who we will honor tomorrow, personally led the fleet that broke the Syndicate blockade of Centauri Prime. 17 human ships were destroyed in that battle. Over 3,000 human lives were lost. The general's voice rose slightly, carrying across the memorial garden with crystal clarity. And you want us to honor him without acknowledging the reality of what he died for? You want us to pretend that freedom and peace exist because of philosophical discussions, rather than the sacrifice of those willing to fight for them? Thexvar attempted to regain control of the situation. General, your emotional appeals aside, the fact remains that the majority of galactic species have moved beyond the need for military display. We have evolved past such primitive instincts. Webb smiled, and it was not a pleasant expression. Have you, Ambassador? Then perhaps you can explain why your security team is currently pointing weapons at one of my soldiers. The question hung in the air like a suspended blade. Every eye in the growing crowd turned toward the Zalakian guards, whose energy weapons were still trained on Captain Chen. The hypocrisy of the situation was suddenly crystal clear to everyone present. Or perhaps, Webb continued, pressing his advantage, evolution isn't about abandoning the capacity for force, but rather about having the wisdom to know when force is justified and when it isn't. My guard threatens no one. She honors the dead. Your soldiers threaten her for following orders and maintaining traditions that predate your species' membership in the Galactic Council. The general stepped back and addressed the entire crowd, his voice carrying the authority of someone who had commanded respect across the galaxy. Tomorrow we will bury a hero. He will be honored according to human tradition, protected by human guards and mourned by those who understand the cost of the freedom we all enjoy. Anyone who finds that offensive is welcome to avoid the ceremony. Webb turned back to Thexvar one final time. Now, Ambassador, you have a choice. Order your soldiers to stand down and allow my guard to perform her duty, or explain to the Galactic Council why you created an armed confrontation at a memorial service. The tension in the memorial garden had reached a breaking point. Ambassador Thexvar found himself caught between maintaining face before the growing crowd and backing down from a confrontation that was rapidly spiraling beyond his control. His security team waited for orders, their weapons still trained on Captain Chen, while General Webb stood with the calm confidence of someone who had faced down threats far greater than a diplomatic dispute. The deadlock was broken by an unexpected voice from the crowd. Perhaps someone should ask what the families of the dead actually want. All eyes turned toward the speaker, a middle-aged human woman wearing the simple black dress of mourning. She walked forward with quiet dignity, ignoring the armed guards and alien officials to approach the tomb directly. My name is Dr. Elena Vasquez, she announced to the assembled crowd. Admiral Pike was my brother. The revelation sent a ripple of surprise through the gathered beings. General Webb straightened even further, recognizing the importance of this moment. The Admiral's sister had just inserted herself into what was already a delicate diplomatic situation. Dr. Vasquez stopped directly beside Captain Chen, close enough to touch the guard's ceremonial rifle. My brother fought in 7 major campaigns across 4 decades of service. He was wounded 16 times, decorated for valor more times than I can count, and never once asked for recognition or praise. All he ever wanted was to protect those who couldn't protect themselves. She turned to face Ambassador Thexvar directly, her eyes blazing with a mixture of grief and anger. And you want to dishonor his memory by removing the very symbol of the oath he lived by? You want to pretend that peace exists without guardians? Thexvar's exoskeleton shifted to a pale gray, indicating deep discomfort. Dr. Vasquez, surely you understand that we mean no disrespect. We simply believe that weapons and military displays are inconsistent with peaceful mourning. Peaceful mourning. Dr. Vasquez's voice carried across the garden with the force of absolute conviction. Ambassador, 3 months ago, my brother died protecting a Zalakian research station from syndicate raiders. He could have retreated when his ship was crippled. Instead, he stayed to ensure the evacuation of 200 scientists and their families. 37 of those scientists were Zalakian. The impact of her words was immediate and devastating. Several Zalakian officials in the crowd began clicking to each other in their native language, their exoskeletons taking on colors that indicated shame and confusion. Ambassador Thexvar himself seemed to shrink, his earlier bluster evaporating. But Dr. Vasquez wasn't finished. My brother's final message to our family was simple. Tell them I kept faith. Not faith in politics or diplomacy or treaties, but faith in the idea that some things are worth defending, regardless of the cost. General Webb seized the moment to press their advantage. Dr. Vasquez raises an important point, Ambassador. Perhaps we should examine exactly who has been saved by human military action over the past decade. The general activated his communication device, and a holographic display materialized above the tomb. Data streams flowed across the projection, showing rescue operations, defensive actions, and humanitarian missions spanning dozens of star systems. The Arcturus colony evacuation, Webb narrated as images flashed across the display. 800,000 Venturi civilians saved from solar flare devastation by human emergency response fleets. The Rigel blockade, where human forces broke a syndicate siege to liberate 4 mining worlds. The Kepler Station incident, where human marines repelled borders threatening a multi-species research facility. Each example was accompanied by casualty figures, both saved and lost. The numbers painted a stark picture of human sacrifice in service of galactic peace and security. In every case, Webb continued, human forces operated under strict rules of engagement, designed to minimize casualties while maximizing protection for civilian populations. These weren't conquests or aggressive actions. They were rescue missions, carried out by soldiers who understood that their weapons were tools of protection, not oppression. A new voice joined the conversation as Commander Zethrak of the Centauri Defense Corps stepped forward from the crowd. His blue-skinned, tall frame commanded attention, and his presence added another dimension to the growing confrontation. General Webb speaks truth, Zethrak announced in his precise musical accent. My homeworld exists today because Admiral Pike refused to abandon us when the Syndicate fleets arrived. Centauri tradition demands that we honor our debts to the dead. Any attempt to prevent proper memorial rites would be considered an act of profound disrespect. The Centauri commander's words carried significant weight. As one of the founding members of the Galactic Council, Centauri opinions often influenced policy decisions across multiple sectors. Ambassador Thexvar found himself increasingly isolated as more voices joined the conversation. A Morphin diplomat named Chorus of Winds approached with the swaying gait of her species, her bark-like skin rustling with each movement. The human memorial traditions are not violent displays, Chorus of Winds stated in her harmonic voice. They are expressions of dedication to principles that benefit all species. The Morphin Collective supports the continuation of these rites. What had begun as a simple attempt to remove an honor guard was rapidly becoming a referendum on human military culture and its place in galactic society. Representatives from dozens of species found themselves forced to take sides in a debate they hadn't expected to be part of. General Webb recognized the shift in momentum and decided to make one final point. Ambassador Thexvar, you mentioned evolution earlier. Let me share something about human evolution. We didn't evolve to be the strongest or the fastest or the most advanced. We evolved to be persistent. We evolved to honor our commitments, to stand by our principles, and to protect those who cannot protect themselves. The general gestured toward Captain Chen, who had maintained her position throughout the entire confrontation. This guard will stand here until properly relieved, regardless of threats or political pressure. Not because she's programmed to do so, not because she's following mindless orders, but because she understands that some duties transcend convenience. Webb stepped closer to Thexvar, lowering his voice so that only the ambassador and those immediately nearby could hear. The question now, Ambassador, is whether you want to be remembered as the being who started a fight at a funeral, or whether you want to show the galaxy that even artificial conflicts can be resolved through wisdom rather than force. The challenge was clear, and every being in the Memorial Garden understood the stakes. The decision Ambassador Thexvar made in the next few moments would echo far beyond this single confrontation, potentially affecting relationships between species for years to come. The gathered crowd waited in tense silence as the Zalakian ambassador considered his options, his exoskeleton cycling through several colors as he processed the complexity of his situation. Ambassador Thexvar's exoskeleton had settled into a mottled pattern of gray and blue, indicating deep internal conflict. The weight of the moment pressed down on him as he realized that his simple attempt to demonstrate Zalakian authority had instead triggered a galaxy-wide examination of human military, culture, and sacrifice. His communication device chirped softly, and he glanced at the incoming message. His compound eyes widened as he read the text, and his exoskeleton immediately shifted to the pale white of shock. "General Webb," he said quietly, his translator barely above a whisper. "I have just received word from the Galactic Council. Emergency session has been called." "Real emergency session this time." Webb studied the ambassador's expression, recognizing genuine distress rather than diplomatic maneuvering. "What's the nature of the emergency, Ambassador?" Thexvar's claws clicked nervously against his ceremonial staff. "Syndicate fleet movements in the Outer Rim. 3 colony worlds have gone silent in the past 6 hours. Preliminary reconnaissance suggests coordinated attacks across multiple systems." The information hit the gathered crowd like a physical blow. The Syndicate had been quiet for nearly 2 years, leading many to believe their criminal organization had finally been broken by combined galactic enforcement efforts. The revelation that they were not only still active but capable of large-scale operations sent ripples of fear through representatives from vulnerable worlds. Dr. Vasquez stepped forward, her face pale but determined. "General, how long before we know the full scope of the situation?" Webb was already activating his own communication systems, pulling up tactical displays and fleet positions. "My staff is analyzing the reports now. Initial assessment suggests this is not a random raid but a carefully planned offensive." The holographic displays above the tomb shifted from memorial statistics to tactical readouts. Star charts showed the affected systems, highlighted in ominous red, while fleet positions were marked across the local sector. The scope of the Syndicate operation became clear as more data streamed in. 17 separate facilities attacked simultaneously, Webb reported grimly. Mining stations, research outposts, and 3 full colony worlds. Estimated civilian population at risk, over 2 million beings from 15 different species. Commander Zethrak moved closer to study the tactical displays. The pattern suggests they're targeting infrastructure and supply lines. This isn't about slaves or quick profit. They're trying to establish permanent territorial control. The implications were staggering. The Syndicate had never before attempted to hold territory against organized opposition. Their strategy had always been to strike fast, take what they could, and disappear back into the void before military response could be coordinated. Ambassador Thexvar found himself facing a reality that his species had tried to ignore. "General, what forces are available to respond to this threat?" Webb's expression was grim as he reviewed the tactical situation. "The nearest human fleet is Admiral Rodriguez's task force, currently 3 days away at best speed. Centauri forces are closer but insufficient for an operation of this magnitude. Most other species maintain only defensive capabilities in that sector." The uncomfortable truth was becoming clear to everyone present. Despite decades of galactic cooperation and peacekeeping agreements, when real threats emerged, it was still human forces that bore the primary burden of response. "However," Webb continued, his voice taking on the tone of command that had once coordinated the defense of entire star systems, "there is one option." The memorial service tomorrow was scheduled to host the largest gathering of human military leadership in this sector in over 5 years. Every admiral, every general, every commander who served with Admiral Pike will be here. Dr. Vasquez understood immediately. "You're talking about coordinating the response from here, using my brother's funeral as a staging ground for military operations." It was an idea that would have seemed impossible just hours earlier, but the crisis had changed everything. The memorial garden that had been the site of diplomatic confrontation was now potentially the command center for the largest rescue operation in recent galactic history. Chorus of winds swayed thoughtfully, her harmonic voice carrying across the garden. The Morphin Collective's scout ships could provide reconnaissance data for human fleet movements. Our vessels are fast enough to reach the affected systems within hours. Zethrak nodded agreement. Centauri Defense Forces can establish perimeter control and evacuation support. Our experience with rapid population transfers would be valuable for civilian rescue operations. Even some of the Zalakian officials in the crowd began offering support. Our medical ships could provide humanitarian aid, one suggested hesitantly. We have advanced trauma facilities that could treat casualties from multiple species. Ambassador Thexvar watched as the beings around him, moments before locked in diplomatic conflict, began organizing what could become the largest interspecies military operation in galactic history. The transformation was remarkable and somewhat humbling. General Webb turned to Captain Chen, who had maintained her vigil throughout the entire crisis. Captain, I'm going to need to coordinate response operations from this location. Can you maintain your post while we establish command and control around the memorial? Sir, yes, sir, Chen replied without hesitation. The honor guard does not abandon their duty regardless of circumstances. Webb nodded with satisfaction. Outstanding. Dr. Vasquez, I know this isn't what you planned for your brother's memorial, but Admiral Pike would have understood the necessity. Elena Vasquez looked at the tactical displays showing millions of civilians in danger, then at the growing group of alien officials offering their species support for rescue operations. General, my brother spent his entire career fighting to protect people he'd never met, belonging to species that sometimes didn't appreciate the sacrifice. If his memorial becomes the staging ground for saving 2 million lives, he would consider that the greatest honor possible. The irony was not lost on anyone present. Ambassador Thexvar's attempt to remove human military traditions from the memorial had instead resulted in those same traditions becoming the foundation for the largest humanitarian rescue operation in recent memory. As communication links were established and preliminary planning began, the memorial garden transformed from a place of quiet reflection to a hub of coordinated activity. But at its center, Captain Chen continued her vigil, standing guard over the unknown soldiers whose sacrifice had made such cooperation possible. The real test of galactic unity was about to begin, and it would be measured not in diplomatic votes or peaceful resolutions, but in the willingness of different species to work together in the face of genuine danger. Within 2 hours, the memorial gardens had been transformed into something unprecedented in galactic history, a multi-species command center operating under human military coordination. Portable communication arrays had been deployed around the tomb of the unknown soldier, creating a web of real-time tactical information that connected dozens of worlds and fleets across 3 sectors. General Webb stood at the center of it all, his command presence drawing officers and officials from across the galaxy into an organized response that seemed impossible just hours earlier. The man who had once been dismissed as clinging to primitive military traditions was now demonstrating exactly why those traditions mattered. Admiral Rodriguez, report status, Webb commanded, his voice carrying clearly through the communication array. The holographic image of Admiral Maria Rodriguez materialized above the tactical display, her weathered face showing the strain of emergency fleet movements. General, we've achieved maximum burn on all vessels. ETA to the Kepler system is 47 hours. However, that assumes the Syndicate doesn't move deeper into our territory while we're en route. Commander Zethrak approached with updated intelligence from Centauri scouts. General Webb, our reconnaissance indicates the Syndicate is using a new tactical approach. They're establishing forward bases on captured asteroids, creating a defensive network that will be difficult to assault directly. Webb studied the incoming data with the focused intensity that had made him legendary among human military circles. They're learning from previous defeats. Instead of hit-and-run raids, they're trying to create fortified positions that will force us into costly frontal assaults. The tactical implications were serious. Traditional rescue operations relied on rapid deployment and overwhelming force to break Syndicate positions before they could organize effective resistance. If the criminals had indeed adopted defensive strategies, The cost in both time and lives could be catastrophic. Dr. Vasquez had remained close to the command center, her expertise in xenobiology proving unexpectedly valuable, as reports came in about alien civilian populations under threat. General, the Altarian colonies in the Kepler system have specific atmospheric requirements. If the Syndicate disrupts their life support systems, we'll have less than 18 hours before permanent casualties begin. It was the kind of detail that could make the difference between successful rescue and tragic failure. Webb absorbed the information and immediately began incorporating it into operational planning. Morphin scouts, he called to Chorus of Winds, who had taken position near the communication arrays. Can your vessels conduct atmospheric analysis of the Altarian colonies while approaching the target zone? Chorus of Winds swayed in what humans had learned to recognize as agreement. Our bioships are ideally suited for such analysis. We can provide real-time environmental data for all affected colonies and relay emergency life support requirements to human rescue vessels. The coordination was remarkable to observe. Beings from species that normally interacted only through formal diplomatic channels were sharing tactical information, offering specialized capabilities, and adapting their procedures to support human-led operations. Ambassador Thexvar, who had begun the day trying to remove human guards from a memorial, now found himself coordinating Zalakian medical support for the rescue effort. General Webb, our hospital ships can be positioned at these coordinates within 36 hours. We have facilities for trauma surgery across 17 different species physiologies. Webb nodded acknowledgement, while simultaneously reviewing updated intelligence reports. Ambassador, coordinate with Dr. Vasquez on specific medical requirements for the affected populations. Her xenobiology expertise will help prioritize treatment protocols. The irony was not lost on anyone present. The memorial garden that was supposed to host a simple funeral had become the nerve center for an operation that could save millions of lives across multiple star systems. Captain Chen continued her vigil at the tomb, her presence serving as both symbol and anchor for the growing international effort. Several junior officers from different species had taken to referring to her position as the center point, recognizing that all the tactical displays and communication arrays seemed to radiate outward from her unwavering stance. General, called Lieutenant Commander Park from the Human Communications Station. We're receiving priority transmission from Admiral Pike's former task force. They request permission to join the rescue operation. Webb's expression softened slightly. Admiral Pike's old command had been scattered across various assignments after his death, but apparently news of the crisis had reached them. Granted, have them rendezvous with Rodriguez's fleet at the staging area. Dr. Vasquez stepped closer to Webb, her voice quiet, but determined. General, I have a request. I know it's irregular, but I want to join the medical team going to the rescue zones. Webb studied the Admiral's sister carefully. Dr. Vasquez, this will be a combat operation. Medical personnel will be operating under extremely dangerous conditions. I understand the risks, she replied firmly. But those people out there are facing the same dangers my brother died fighting against. I have skills that could save lives, and I can't honor his memory by hiding behind ceremony while others suffer. It was exactly the kind of request that Admiral Pike would have made in similar circumstances, and Webb recognized the family resemblance. Very well. You'll be assigned to the Zalakian hospital ship. Ambassador Thexvar, can you ensure Dr. Vasquez has appropriate medical clearances? The Zalakian ambassador, who had started the day viewing humans as militaristic and primitive, now found himself working to accommodate a request that embodied everything he was beginning to understand about human principles. Of course, General. It will be our honor to work with Admiral Pike's sister. As the planning continued, a new communication arrived that changed the entire scope of the operation. The image of Fleet Admiral Chen, the highest-ranking human military officer in the sector, appeared in the holographic display. General Webb, I've been monitoring your coordination efforts from Fleet Headquarters. Outstanding work under impossible circumstances. I'm hereby authorizing full sector-wide mobilization for this operation. Every available human vessel, every reserve unit, every support facility is now at your disposal. The authorization was unprecedented. Webb now had tactical command of military resources that normally required approval from Earth itself. The trust being placed in his judgment was both humbling and empowering. Admiral Chen understood. We'll coordinate with Allied forces to maximize effectiveness while minimizing casualties. General, Fleet Admiral Chen continued. There's one more thing. The timing of tomorrow's memorial service works in our favor. Every major human military leader will be present. I'm suggesting we use the ceremony itself as our final coordination meeting before launching the rescue operation. The proposal was audacious. Admiral Pike's funeral would become not just a memorial, but the launching point for the largest rescue operation in recent galactic history. It would demonstrate that human military traditions were not empty ceremony, but living principles that guided action in the face of genuine crisis. Webb looked around the memorial garden, now buzzing with activity from dozens of species working together under human coordination. I believe Admiral Pike would approve. His memorial will honor not just his sacrifice, but the principles he died defending. The dawn of Admiral Pike's funeral brought an unprecedented gathering to the memorial gardens. What should have been a solemn ceremony for a few hundred attendees had become a galactic assembly of thousands. Representatives from 47 different species had arrived overnight, drawn not only by respect for the fallen admiral, but by the growing awareness that they were witnessing something historic. Captain Chen had maintained her vigil throughout the night, becoming a symbol of unwavering dedication that transcended species boundaries. Her steady presence had provided continuity as the memorial grounds transformed around her, tactical displays giving way to formal ceremonial arrangements while maintaining the communication networks needed for ongoing operational coordination. General Webb stood at the head of the assembled military leadership, his dress uniform complemented by similar formal attire, worn by officers from across the human fleet. But they were not alone. Centauri commanders wore their distinctive crystalline rank insignia. Morphin delegation leaders displayed their ceremonial bark patterns, and even Zalakian officials had donned their most formal exoskeletons in recognition of the moment's significance. Dr. Elena Vasquez approached the podium that had been erected near the tomb, her simple black dress contrasting with the elaborate uniforms surrounding her. As Admiral Pike's sister and closest surviving family member, tradition granted her the right to speak first at the memorial service. When my brother was 7 years old, she began, her voice carrying clearly across the silent gathering. He found an injured bird in our backyard. Our parents told him it probably wouldn't survive, that nature was cruel and death was natural. But Marcus refused to accept that explanation. He spent 3 weeks nursing that bird back to health, feeding it by hand, protecting it from predators, never giving up even when it seemed hopeless. The story seemed simple, almost childish in the context of the galactic crisis they faced. But Dr. Vasquez continued with growing conviction. 37 years later, when Syndicate raiders attacked the Zalakian research station at Vega 7, my brother could have followed standard military doctrine. He could have waited for reinforcements, minimized human casualties, and accepted that some losses were inevitable. Instead, he chose to risk everything to save people he had never met, belonging to a species that some humans still viewed with suspicion. Her words resonated across the assembled crowd, as beings from different worlds recognized the parallel she was drawing, the same stubborn refusal to accept preventable suffering that had driven a 7-year-old boy to save an injured bird had ultimately led Admiral Pike to sacrifice his life protecting aliens who might never know his name. Today, Dr. Vasquez continued, we face another moment when accepting loss would be the easier path. 2 million civilians are trapped in Syndicate-controlled territory. The logical response would be to mourn their fate while protecting ourselves. But my brother taught me that humans don't always choose the logical path. Sometimes we choose the right path, regardless of the cost. General Webb stepped forward as Dr. Vasquez concluded her remarks, his presence commanding immediate attention from the diverse assembly. But instead of delivering a traditional eulogy, he activated the tactical displays that had been temporarily concealed during the formal ceremony. Admiral Pike's final battle plan has become the foundation for our current rescue operation, Webb announced, his voice carrying to every corner of the memorial grounds. His tactical analysis of Syndicate defensive strategies, completed just days before his death, has provided the framework for what we're about to attempt. The revelation sent a murmur of surprise through the gathered crowd. Even in death, Admiral Pike was contributing to the salvation of those he had died protecting. The operation begins in 6 hours, Webb continued, his words transforming the memorial service into a final mission briefing. Admiral Rodriguez's task force will conduct the primary assault on Syndicate positions, while Centauri evacuation vessels extract civilian populations. Morphin scouts will provide real-time intelligence, and Zalakian medical ships will treat casualties from all affected species. Commander Zethrak stepped forward to address the assembly. This operation represents unprecedented cooperation between our peoples. We go forward not as separate species pursuing individual interests, but as a unified force dedicated to protecting the innocent. It was a remarkable moment. The memorial service was becoming something far greater than a traditional farewell to a fallen hero. It was transforming into a declaration of shared purpose that transcended the diplomatic and cultural barriers that normally separated galactic civilizations. Ambassador Thexvar approached the podium, his exoskeleton displaying the deep blue colors that indicated solemn respect among his people. Yesterday, I believed that humans clung to primitive military traditions that had no place in an evolved galactic society. Today, I understand that those traditions embody principles that make such cooperation possible. The ambassador's words carried special weight, given his role in the previous day's confrontation. His public acknowledgement of human military values represented a significant shift in Zalakian official attitudes. The guard who stands at this tomb, Thexvar continued, gesturing toward Captain Chen, represents more than ceremonial duty. She embodies the commitment to principle that allows different species to trust human leadership in times of crisis. As if responding to some unspoken signal, Captain Chen took one step forward and executed a perfect ceremonial salute toward Admiral Pike's casket. Her movement was precise, dignified, and somehow managed to honor both the dead admiral and the living mission that would launch within hours. General Webb returned the salute, then addressed the entire assembly with the authority that came from 4 decades of military command. In 6 hours, ships from 14 different species will launch the largest rescue operation in galactic history. They will do so under human tactical coordination, following plans developed by the Admiral we honor today, supported by principles that some consider outdated, but which have proven their worth in crisis after crisis. The general paused, allowing his words to resonate across the diverse gathering. Admiral Pike once told me that a soldier's greatest victory was not in winning battles, but in proving that some principles are worth any sacrifice. Today we prove that he was right. As the formal ceremony concluded, the gathered military leaders began moving toward their departure points with the coordinated efficiency that comes from excellent planning and shared purpose. But they moved as one unified force rather than separate national contingents, a transformation that would have seemed impossible just 2 days earlier. The Memorial Garden began its final transformation from ceremonial space to operational launching point. Tactical displays returned to full operation. Communication arrays reconnected to fleet channels, and the organized chaos of military deployment filled the air. Through it all, Captain Chen maintained her position at the tomb, her presence serving as the unchanging center around which history was being made. The guard duty that Ambassador Thexvar had tried to eliminate had instead become the foundation for the greatest demonstration of interspecies cooperation in galactic memory. 72 hours after the last rescue ship departed from the Memorial Gardens, the operation that had begun at Admiral Pike's funeral was declared a complete success. Of the 2.3 million civilians trapped in Syndicate-controlled territory, over 2.1 million had been successfully evacuated. The remaining casualties were primarily attributed to Syndicate actions before the rescue fleets arrived, rather than operational failures during the mission itself. Captain Sarah Chen stood once again at the tomb of the unknown soldier, her ceremonial rifle held at the precise angle that military tradition demanded. But the memorial garden around her had been permanently changed by the events of the past week. What had once been a simple memorial space had become a symbol of interspecies cooperation and the principles that made such cooperation possible. General Webb approached the tomb for what would be his final visit. Before returning to fleet headquarters, the successful coordination of the rescue operation had elevated his status within both human and galactic military circles. But his attention remained focused on the simple ceremony that had triggered everything. Captain Chen, how does it feel to know that your dedication to duty helped save over 2 million lives? Webb asked quietly. Chen's response came without hesitation. Sir, I was simply doing my job. The honor guard protects the memory of those who died defending others. If that protection extends to the living, then we've fulfilled our highest purpose. It was exactly the response Webb had expected, and it embodied everything that made human military traditions effective. The dedication to duty without regard for personal recognition, the commitment to principles that transcended immediate circumstances, the willingness to serve something greater than individual interest. Dr. Elena Vasquez approached from the main pathway, having returned from 3 days aboard Zalakian hospital ships treating casualties from the rescue operation. Her experience working alongside alien medical teams had provided her with perspectives that went far beyond her original expertise in xenobiology. "General, I wanted to thank you for allowing me to participate in the medical mission," she said, her voice carrying the exhaustion of someone who had worked around the clock to save lives. "Working with the Zalakian medical teams taught me things about their culture that decades of diplomatic interaction never revealed." Webb nodded understanding. "Dr. Vasquez, your brother would have been proud of your service. You honored his memory by putting his principles into action." The three humans stood in comfortable silence for several moments, each reflecting on how dramatically their lives had changed since the confrontation with Ambassador Thexvar just days earlier. What had begun as a simple diplomatic dispute had evolved into something that would influence galactic relationships for decades to come. Ambassador Thexvar himself appeared at the edge of the memorial space, approaching with the careful deliberation that indicated he had something important to communicate. His exoskeleton displayed the deep purple colors that signified formal respect among his people. "General Webb, Captain Chen, Dr. Vasquez," he said, offering the elaborate bow that represented the highest form of Zalakian courtesy. "I have come to deliver a message from the Galactic Council." Webb tensed slightly, unsure whether to expect criticism or commendation for the unprecedented military coordination that had bypassed normal diplomatic channels. "The Council has voted unanimously to establish the Admiral Pike Protocol," Thexvar announced, his translator carrying undertones of what seemed to be genuine admiration. "Future emergency operations will be coordinated using the command structure and cooperative principles demonstrated during the recent rescue mission." The implications were staggering. The Galactic Council was essentially institutionalizing human military leadership for crisis response operations, recognizing that the principles underlying human military culture provided the most effective framework for multi-species cooperation under extreme circumstances. Furthermore, Thexvar continued, "The Council has designated this memorial site as a permanent center for interspecies military coordination. The Tomb of the Unknown Soldier will serve as the symbolic heart of galactic defense cooperation." Captain Chen's expression remained professionally neutral, but Webb could see the pride in her eyes. The guard post that she had refused to abandon was now officially recognized as one of the most important strategic locations in known space. Dr. Vasquez stepped forward with a question that had been troubling her since returning from the medical mission. "Ambassador, what about the Syndicate forces that escaped during the rescue operation? Intelligence suggests they're regrouping in the Outer Rim territories." Thexvar's exoskeleton shifted to colors indicating both concern and determination. "That, Dr. Vasquez, is why the Admiral Pike Protocol includes provisions for permanent joint patrol forces. Ships from multiple species will conduct regular sweeps of vulnerable systems, using human tactical coordination to prevent future large-scale attacks." It was exactly the kind of proactive approach that Admiral Pike had advocated throughout his career. Rather than simply responding to crises after they developed, the galactic community was finally accepting the need for persistent vigilance and coordinated deterrence. General Webb studied the tactical implications of the new arrangement. "Ambassador, this represents a fundamental shift in how the galactic community approaches security issues. Are all member species prepared to commit military resources to such an arrangement?" "The rescue operation provided a practical demonstration of effectiveness," Thexvar replied. Species that had never cooperated militarily before worked together seamlessly under human coordination. The results speak for themselves. The success of the operation had indeed created momentum for broader changes in galactic military doctrine. Species that had historically maintained only defensive capabilities were now volunteering specialized units for joint operations, recognizing that their security was interconnected with the stability of neighboring systems. Commander Zethrak arrived with a small delegation of Centauri officials, their crystalline rank insignia catching the artificial sunlight of the memorial garden. General Webb, we bring greetings from the Centauri High Command and an invitation to establish permanent human liaison offices within our defense headquarters. The offer represented unprecedented integration between human and alien military commands. Centauri forces had historically maintained strict independence, cooperating with other species only through formal treaty arrangements rather than embedded command structures. As representatives from more species arrived throughout the day, it became clear that the events surrounding Admiral Pike's funeral had triggered changes that extended far beyond the immediate rescue operation. The Memorial Garden was becoming a pilgrimage site for military leaders from across the galaxy, who came to study the principles that had made unprecedented cooperation possible. Captain Chen continued her vigil throughout these visits, her presence serving as a constant reminder of the dedication to duty that had anchored the entire transformation. The guard post that Ambassador Thexvar had tried to eliminate was now recognized as the foundation for a new era of galactic cooperation. As the sun set over the Memorial Gardens, General Webb took one final look at the tactical displays that had been permanently installed around the tomb. Real-time information flowed from dozens of systems, coordinated through the communication networks that connected the memorial to fleet commands across known space. Admiral Pike, Webb said quietly to the tomb, you would have been amazed by what your memorial accomplished. Your principles didn't just inspire a rescue operation, they created the foundation for lasting peace. Captain Chen's voice carried clearly across the evening air as she spoke the traditional words of the changing of the guard. Post remains secure. Duty continues. Memory endures. But now those words carried meaning that extended far beyond human military tradition. They had become the foundation for galactic security, proving that some principles are indeed worth any sacrifice.